Hi, my name is Beth, and welcome back to Fixated, where I sit down, get ready, and talk about what I'm currently hyperfixated on. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that has always fascinated me. Growing up, I was a big fan of vampire books, vampire movies. I was a Carlisle girl. But believe it or not, I have never seen the Vampire Diaries, and my friend recently got me to start watching it, and I will make a video about the Vampire Diaries because I am obsessed. And as I was watching it, I was thinking, when did vampires start? Did they start with a big vampire witch hunt in New England? Did they start with Dracula? Are they real? Are they not? Do vampires exist? Should I be scared? And I spent all night researching my ass off, and will be telling you everything I learned about the origin of vampires. And we will conclude by the end whether or not they're real. When I tell you guys, I did so much research last night. Look, all of my notes on vampires. I am not kidding. And we're even going to be talking about lesbian vampires. That's right. Lesbian vampires. It was a thing. Let's get this started. Now, in literally every single nation in the entire world, there is some kind of mythology relating to vampires. It's fucking everywhere. In Scandinavian folklore, in Mesopotamia, in Persia, literally everywhere. They would mostly be stories of blood-drinking demons, but one very common theme I've seen among all of this ancient mythology is these stories of these women who were actually demons who would seduce men and then drain the blood from their bodies. In Old Norse Scandinavian folklore, you'd see these undead creatures who were decaying, who had superhuman strength, who could shapeshift into seals and see the future and stuff like that. Mesopotamia even had stories of women eating babies. This kind of sounds like a method to control women. Oh, beware of women. Don't give them too much power. They'll eat your babies. In Russian folklore, vampires were these witches or women who would just rebel against the Russian Orthodox Church. Yeah, mostly when I researched all ancient vampires, most of them were women. Half vampire, half children were very common in Slavic folklore, like a vampire dad and a mortal mother. I also read this story about this Serbian widow who tried to blame her pregnancy on her late husband who had come up as a vampire and then gotten her pregnant. And I even read about these men pretending to be vampires so that they could get with women. But enough about ancient history. Let's go to 17th century Europe because that's where it starts getting juicy. There was mass hysteria throughout 17th century and 18th century Europe concerning vampires. Now, earlier vampires weren't really thought of what we think of vampires today. They were more so zombies as opposed to vampires. It was more so a corpse raising up from their grave and then attacking the town or something. And this was way more common among poorer villages, because when you have poorer villages, you don't have a lot of medical care and a lot of diseases and a lot of people, dropping like flies. Vampirism was on the rise. This was an actual diagnosis by doctors. Vampirism. I mean, I'm not even surprised, because back then being possessed by a demon was a medical diagnosis by a doctor. When the plague was around, a lot of that was blamed on vampires. Vampire rats, maybe. But the first recorded case of vampirism in modern history was the case of Jurgen. I don't really know how to pronounce these names. I didn't look it up because I have ADHD and don't do anything before I'm supposed to. So in what's known as modern day Croatia, Jur was a peasant and he died in 1656 due to an illness. But 16 years later, it was said that he arose from his grave and started terrorizing the village. Every village priest at this time was known as the doctor, the police, the mayor, the priest. So the village priest discovered that someone was knocking on doors at night around the village, and someone from each of those houses would die within a few days. And the priest decided to stay out one night and confront this vampire. Good idea. That's gonna end really well. The priest came face to face with Jur. I don't know if it was Jur. And he said, "Behold, Jesus Christ, stop tormenting us." And I guess this worked. So the next day, what they did was they dug up Jur's grave. They pierced his heart with a wooden stick. It wasn't even a wooden stake. It was a little stick off of a tree. But surprise, surprise, it didn't go through his chest, his decayed chest. So they cut his head off. This was the Age of Enlightenment. And the next recorded case of vampirism in Eastern Europe at this time was Petar. I don't know if it's Petar or Peter, but I'm going to call him Petar because I feel like it. Petar's case escalated the vampire hysteria to a massive level in Eastern Europe. Tarte died in 1725, and within 8 days, 9 people died. Which I imagine if Tarte like died of an illness or something, maybe other people like got that illness. I don't know. Here's the thing, like a lot of illnesses at this time was blamed on like vampirism, the plague or rabies or TB in New England. And on each of these 9 victims' deathbeds, they each said that they were visited by Tarte in the night. They weren't like drained of their blood or anything, but they were visited by him and then they died. And the villagers, including the village priest, decided to dig up his body to find signs of vampirism. What are the signs of vampirism? Well, there really is only one sign, and that is that the body is in perfect condition and not decomposed, as if the person was died just now. Also, they would look at the hair and the nails to see if they had grown at all since the person was buried, and they would look at their mouth to see if there was blood in their mouth. Maybe there was drawing blood, I don't know. I didn't see too much on that. All I saw was like he would just visit and then they would die. I didn't really get a clear idea of like what he did. If I like woke up and someone was like standing over my bed, that would scare the shit out of anyone, I think. So they dug up Tarte, and his corpse was in perfect condition. Vampirism. It was only a week after his death, so that makes sense. But they had also noticed that his hair, his beard, and his fingernails had all grown, which dead bodies don't do that. Vampirism. And along with this vampire hysteria came a lot of like stakings, digging up people's graves, and killing suspects of vampirism. Vampirism. Man, I would have hated to just live like in this time. A lot of people being accused of vampirism. Vampirism. Even some rulers were accused of vampirism because of the rulers at this time were just really, really sick people. I am not surprised at all that they were accused of being vampires. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually were vampires. It's said that Count Dracula was inspired by a ruler in Romania in the 15th century called Vlad the Impaler. What a name. Vlad the Impaler. Vlad the Impaler. And you know what impaling is? It's where you... I know what the word impaling means, but I didn't know what impaling meant. And then like I saw like a drawing of it, and I regret that. I regret it very much. Impaling someone basically means you like stab them with a wooden stake, but you stab their entire body, you know, going in the mouth and out the... So you're just kind of... He was also known to dip his like bread and snacks in his enemy's blood. So I see why people thought he was a vampire. Probably was. And another ruler said to have started the whole lesbian vampirism trope. And if you don't know what the lesbian vampirism trope is, it was basically this film trope in the 20th century that portrayed lesbians as like these monsters. It was a completely homophobic, awful thing to do. And the woman said to have inspired that was a Hungarian countess named Elizabeth, said to have killed hundreds of women and girls, mainly girls, between 1590 and 1620. She had a lot of vampire-like traits, which makes sense why people thought she was one, like bathing in the blood of her victims. Y'all, she killed a lot of like young girls, and it was like kind of like a turn-on for her, I guess. It's so gross. And we don't need to talk about Dracula, because like, yeah, Dracula, we get it. 1897. Whatever. Let's talk about a vampire novel that came out 26 years before Dracula called Carmilla. This was the birth of lesbian vampirism, but this novel was known to be more progressive than the trope that it was created into. Lesbian vampirism. This novel was about a female vampire falling in love with a young woman. And literally, I read like a passage from this, and it is so fucking deep. And her being a vampire is more so a metaphor of her being an outcast, but then this trope was taken and created into something awful, homophobic. And there was a smudge on my face while I was talking. Lesbian vampirism. So let's talk about Dracula's Daughter in the 1930s and how it ruined my life. This movie, Dracula's Daughter in the 1930s, was meant to depict homosexuality as dangerous. Lesbian vampirism. The literal poster for this film said, "Save the women of London from Dracula's daughter." I mean, come on. Now that we've covered Europe, let's talk about the vampire hysteria in New England. Now, New England is known to do drastic things to avoid the supernatural. I was about to say the lesbian witch trials because I've been saying lesbian vampirism so much. The Salem witch trials. And it's very, very interesting how much witches and vampires are connected in like history and my research, how much they connected the two together. One of the most famous cases of vampirism in New England happened in Exeter, Rhode Island in the late 19th century. This is how a story of how a whole family came down with tuberculosis and then blamed their vampire daughter. The first one to catch tuberculosis and die in the Brown family was Mary Eliza, the mother. The next to go was Mary Olive, their eldest daughter. And the next one to die of tuberculosis was their other daughter, Mercy. Poor George Brown, he was the dad. Oh my God, like your whole family dies within the span of like a week. And after Mercy died, George's only son, the last of his entire family, Edwin, caught tuberculosis. Now, this just didn't sit right with George. He was like, why are all of my family members dying of this illness when we all lived in one home together? There's only one explanation. Vampirism. He believed that one person in his family who had already died was a vampire and started killing off the rest of his family members one by one and covering it with tuberculosis. So what did George do? Well, he heard about this nifty little trick in Europe where they just dug up someone's corpse and searched for signs of vampirism. So he dug up his wife, Mary Eliza, and his daughters, Mary Olive and Mercy. And he did not just dig this up himself. He got help from like the police and the city. They were like, oh yes, it could be vampirism. Tuberculosis? Nay. Now all of the corpses had decomposed except for one. Mercy Brown. Not only that, she still had blood in her heart after 2 months. Not decomposed, blood in her heart. There was actually a reasonable explanation for this. Lesbian vampirism. So before her body was buried, she was kept in an above-ground tomb in the dead of winter in New England. So her body was kept in like a frozen-like state. This would obviously cause the body to decompose more slowly. But this was not really known at the time. So to George, the only explanation of his entire family dying was vampirism. So what the doctors did, I'm laughing because it's just so ridiculous. They took Mercy's heart and liver and burned it and then put it into a drink for Edwin. They made Edwin drink it. His sister's heart and liver. And then George was hoping that this would cure Edwin of the vampiric curse. He died 2 months later. Poor George. Now, I think one thing we can learn about all of this vampire hysteria is science is real. You guys, for a second, can we just I love Colourpop so much. Like, I bought the Build Your Own palette. Like, guys. But yeah, to me, like, a lot of cases of lesbian lesbian vampirism, I don't know. It's just that to me, a lot of things in history have been blamed on witches or vampires or demons or women, when people just need to kind of learn to take responsibility for their own shit. Can you just imagine like living in those days and then like now being a ghost and looking at the world today and being like, it wasn't a vampire? I mean, I think when we're all little ghosts looking back on today, we'll be saying very similar things about the things we believe now. It's very hard to imagine, but like that was their reality. They believed in vampires. Like people told them that vampires exist, so they believed vampires exist. And I think we can learn that mass hysteria without education is never good. It never ends well. I need some kind of lip color. Just to make this like a little dark because it's a vampire video and this look is like literally pastel. One thing that I really, really love about the Vampire Diaries as opposed to Twilight is that they make the vampires super manipulative. I've always thought of vampires as like these cunning people who plot and like, and in Twilight, they don't really do that. They're just kind of like emo. That's all I got. Now, I would like you to answer one question for me in the comments. Of all the vampires that we know in movies and TV and mythology and folklore, which vampire would you like to be? Do you want to be Ambrosio and be a vampire, but also like fuck the moon? Do you want to be in the Twilight universe or the Vampire Diaries universe? Do you want to be a lesbian vampire? Lesbian vampire? Lesbian vampire? Who are your favorite vampires? Let me know. If you want to see more from me, go ahead and click that subscribe button. You can also find me on Instagram at Beth Burnham and on TikTok at Beth Burnham with 2 M's. See y'all next time. Bye. Oh. Lesbian vampirism. 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 It was lesbian vampirism.